The moment someone uses God's voice to wound you, something rewires itself, not out there, not in a doctrine or a church building. Inside, where you keep the picture of who God actually is. You know that feeling? You bow your head, close your eyes, try to reach God, and instead of peace, something tightens. A familiar unease, like you're bracing for something, like the face on the other side of that silence might look at you the way they looked at you, with disappointment, with conditions, with that particular coldness that said you were too much and never enough. You've been telling yourself it's a dry season, a faith problem, maybe even a sin problem. But what if none of that is true? What if the distance you feel from God has nothing to do with how far you've drifted, and everything to do with whose face you're actually praying to? Because here's what no one in church hurt recovery ever names with enough precision. When someone uses God's authority to silence you, reject you, or wound you, your brain doesn't just lose trust in them. It does something far more devastating. It fuses their face onto your internal image of God Himself. And every day you carry that without knowing it, healing gets harder to reach. Not because God is withholding it, but because you cannot receive love from someone your nervous system has confused with the person who hurt you. Your soul has been building walls around the very one who never deserved them. This is where it starts, and this is where we're going today. Attachment psychology has a name for what happens when the person designed to be your safe harbor becomes a source of threat. It's called disorganized attachment. And what makes it so quietly catastrophic isn't just the pain, it's that the brain no longer has a reliable map for what safe love looks like. It merges the dangerous with the intimate. It never stops scanning the face of whoever is supposed to love you, searching for the first sign that something is about to go wrong. Now ask yourself this. What happens when the person who wounded you wasn't just a family member, a friend, a pastor, but someone who stood before you speaking in the very name of God? Your nervous system didn't just withdraw trust from that person. It taught itself that the face of divine authority looks like theirs. And now every time you approach God in prayer, in worship, in that quiet space where you most need to be held, your own brain presents you with the face of someone who made you feel small. Their tone, their silence, their conditional approval, that's the portrait you've been praying to without even knowing it. You've been reaching toward healing, and every time you've been reaching toward the wound instead. The mystics of Christian history talked about something they called the face of God, and they weren't speaking metaphorically. Julian of Norwich, writing in the 14th century from a place of suffering most of us can barely imagine, described her encounters with the divine not as theology but as experience. A gaze, a face turned toward her that she struggled to describe because nothing in human language had been made to hold it. She eventually settled on the word homely, which in her century meant intimate, close, like family, like someone who already knows you completely and has chosen you anyway. That is what spiritual betrayal takes from you. Not your faith, not God, but access to that gaze. Someone stood between you and it, and over time, slowly, quietly, without any announcement, their expression became the expression you see when you close your eyes and try to pray. Their judgment became what you imagine when you think about what God expects. Their silence became the silence you interpret when heaven feels distant. The original portrait was never destroyed. It was vandalized, and you've been trying to find love in a painting you can no longer see past the damage. Now I want to pause because something needs to land clearly here. You did not do this to yourself. The human mind doesn't choose to confuse God with the people who wounded us in His name. It happens the way damage spreads through a wall, invisible, silent, only noticed when it's already significant. What neuroscientists call contextual memory contamination describes exactly this. When a traumatic experience in a high-trust context starts to color all emotionally similar situations, your brain learned a pattern: spiritual authority plus vulnerability plus power equals pain. And it generalized because that's what survival looks like. The brain protects you by pattern matching. It just sometimes, catastrophically, matches the wrong face to the wrong love. So the prayer that was designed to feel like coming home begins to feel like walking back into that room. The word Father stops carrying warmth and starts carrying weight. Church hurt doesn't just damage your relationship with a community. It contaminates the interior space where your relationship with God lives. This is why healing has felt so elusive. You've been trying to receive something your own nervous system is blocking at the door. And it goes further than prayer. Because when your internal image of God wears the face of someone who only approved of you conditionally, who made you feel like your pain was inconvenient, who withdrew presence the moment you asked the wrong question, you begin to assume that's how God operates. You stop asking for what you actually need. You learned that asking too much pushes the presence away. You keep yourself small. You confess the same things over and over, not from genuine repentance, but from a terror that if you stop apologizing, the door will close. You're not worshiping God. You're managing your abuser. And the cruelest part is that the more earnestly you seek, the more it activates, because earnestness requires vulnerability. And vulnerability, for someone whose deepest wound came from a sacred space, is the most dangerous feeling in the world. So you stay at the surface, protected, and you call it spiritual immaturity. When actually it's grief, the specific grief of someone whose portrait of God was replaced without their consent. Here is what needs to be said now, and this is the thing that changes everything. The original portrait was never destroyed. When Julian lay at what she believed was the threshold of death, she described something happening that stopped her completely. A face turned toward her, not the face of conditions, not the face of a God tallying her failures or waiting for her performance to improve. A face of what she could only call joy, not because her suffering wasn't real, but because the God she encountered was completely unaffected by her inability to keep it together. He wasn't wearing the expression of anyone who had ever made her feel like too much. That face has been available to you the entire time. You didn't lose God, you lost access to the right portrait, and the difference between those two things is not small, it is everything. The path back is not a program, it's more like learning to hear two voices in the same room and slowly, sometimes painfully, learning to tell them apart. One that sounds like God because it came through someone who claimed to speak for him, and one that is God, quieter, steadier, less interested in your performance than in your presence. Attachment research confirms something that ancient faith already knew. Disorganized attachment can be reorganized, not erased, reorganized. Through consistent, safe, attuned relationship, the brain builds entirely new pathways. It learns that intimacy doesn't always end in pain. It learns that a face turned toward you can mean tenderness, not threat. And it learns to receive love that doesn't come with conditions hidden in the fine print. The theological word for this is grace, not the kind that simply lets you off the hook, the kind that comes looking for you even in the places where you've most carefully sealed the doors. And healing from spiritual betrayal often begins with one quiet, almost invisible act, allowing the smallest crack of difference between the face that wounded you and the face that wept at a tomb outside Jerusalem, between the voice that silenced you and the voice that said, "Come to me, all who are weary." You don't have to rush it, you don't have to perform the forgiveness before you've grieved the damage. You just have to begin to let those two things be different. The portrait is still there. And somewhere beneath everything that was layered over it, beneath the theology that was used as a weapon, beneath the silence that was used as punishment, beneath the church hurt that left its marks on the most sacred part of you, something in you already knows the difference. Your faith didn't die when they hurt you. It found a safer place to wait. And it has been waiting quietly, steadily, without conditions for you to come find it.